Well, hello, my name is Matt Casey. I'm the Associate Director of Graduate Career Counseling here at Tufts University. Uh, Actually, yesterday was my fifth year here. So it is my honor to be in this role. It's something that I love to do. And this is a topic I think is incredibly important to share early in our careers or early in the semester. Um, my background is in business and strategy and owning a career coaching business. I've actually been an executive recruiter in higher ed with experience helping people, finding people and matching them to opportunities and bringing some of those best practices to bear. And I've hired undergraduates and graduates, students in the past, and I've worked in a few different universities in this capacity. So let's talk about resumes. So before we do that, though, and I think this is really important, it's in every slide I present here. This content today is for everybody. The best practices on resume design, everyone will have customized resumes based on the particular targets or searches or opportunities that they seek. Doesn't mean you're customizing every single one from scratch every time. It's not that. But the content here is applicable if you are 8 or 800. So to think about this process, though, from career coaching and the Career Center is just making sure that everyone is aware or knows that career planning is a process. And everybody falls along this continuum at any given time. Sometimes you can run things concurrently at the same time, but it is really, really, really hard to skip steps. So the first part or the top of the slide reflects the strategy. Who are you? What are you looking for? And number 4 really is, what am I focusing on? You could have multiple targets, and targets are just clusters of similar jobs. But what that means is targeting is important for how you create the document, who's that document for, and what you say in it. So preventing a one-size-fits-all document in a modern world where, especially virtually or online, people can apply to anything, is how do we differentiate ourselves? But for the purposes today, we're talking about 2 very important documents that are part of the process, namely resume and cover letter. I'm going to use the term resume and CV interchangeably today. This is intentional. The modern resume and the modern CV, which have often been thought of as very different, are merging into each other. They are becoming hybrids, both chronological and functional. There are still situations when a full-length biographical CV may be helpful for particular clinical roles or academic roles, but for the sake of the conversation today, the term will be used interchangeably. So I think it's fair to say that many of you who are on this may feel exactly the way this person feels in this image. I can tell you that I feel this way in creating mine as well. And to be full disclosure, even though myself and my colleagues as well provide resume, cover letter, coaching amongst a variety of topics, the last several jobs that I've applied for, I work with a professional resume writer and cover letter writer, not because I don't know how to do it. It means it can be very difficult to be objective about yourself or about your own brand. So we want people thinking the fact is it's hard because it's an unusual document. We do not expect you to be any of you today to be experts, or anybody who watches this to be an expert in resume writing. It is a unique and developed skill. We want to be here to provide you the advice, the tools, and the resources to create and develop these documents based on the best practices and topics we're going to cover today. So we don't feel like this while we're doing, it's meant to be a partnership. And it does not take a long time to create a draft or edit it. Martin Yate, who wrote, or still continues to write the Knock 'em Dead career books, still does, had a quote that I think is reasonable. Your resume/CV is the most important document you will ever own. I think that is still, from a professional setting, true, is that It is the one consistent document that is used to submit applications for opportunities. It doesn't mean every job requires one. It doesn't mean you're going to hand everyone one. But the idea is most of the time, though, to be evaluated, some historical document based on your experience and expertise will be featured within these terms. So there could be other pieces, but the best practices we'll talk a minute are a reflection of the fact of this is a showpiece of you to the world and what it takes to optimize it for the future. The one thing I will say that there is a third leg to the stool is that if social media is something you are comfortable with or open to, is that having a LinkedIn profile, at least for now, is one of the more important things, or can be one of the more important things in your career planning process, where the resume is a document that showcases your history of experience and expertise. Your cover letter is focused for a particular opportunity of why you're interesting and why you're valuable. With LinkedIn, it's more of a broader based profile that can reflect a variety of areas of you that are difficult to incorporate sometimes or showcase, or audiences that are different within your resume and cover letter. So just to keep in mind for this conversation, we're not going to go over LinkedIn. We also believe it is a helpful tool. I hope you heard the beeps. It looks like the numbers didn't flash, but regardless, the beeps you heard, that is how long you have between when a hiring manager looks at your resume and decides if they're going to keep reading it or put it in the no pile. It's about 6 seconds. That is it's quick. It's very quick. But we know that this is the behavior of how people review an initial screen of your document. Because again, it's not a biography, it's biographical, it's about you, but the resume is an advertisement to get you a conversation or an interview. So just like when we observe advertisements in print or here on the radio or watch it on a screen, there's a message, there's a purpose to that message, there's an audience for that message, and there's an intention of what they want the person seeing that advertisement to do. It's the same way with a resume. It just happens to be in a specific type of format. So what we're saying is that because we know this is the behavior, we have tools and templates and resources to construct so you get, or hopefully will get, the first 6 seconds, then another 6, then another 6, another 6, until there's a decision to be made to reach out for you to have a conversation. So let's talk about some of what the best resumes and CVs are. First thing is they're interesting. You have a very short amount of time to showcase, in this particular situation, is to tell a story and create interest. And that is the part. It's a narrative document. We believe people should be able to look at the content and be able to infer information about you and your experience by reading pieces of it and reading the whole thing. So where information goes and how it's constructed and how you talk about it, we'll go into the details in a minute, is really critical. And there are 4 things that make it interesting. 1 is the format, which is how it looks. 2 is the content, which is what you did. 3 is the messaging, which is how you did it. And 4 is flow. And flow is how information is organized in a page that makes the most sense to the readers and most effective for getting you to have a conversation based on your experience and expertise. So the beautiful thing about this is there's no singular one way or document to create. And there's an incredible amount of flexibility in a modern resume to be sure. And we'll talk a lot about some best practices or construction you may not have considered historically that proved to be effective in a lot of ways. Several years ago, there was a recruiting company that hired a market research firm to work with all of their recruiters and others with eye tracking software to read resumes. And what they were trying to discover is that when people were initially looking at resumes, where would they spend most of their time on the page? So what you have in front of you is a map visually of the density of where people look. So where you see red is where eyeballs are most likely attuned to. And there were several examples, but it's just to demonstrate that this is a big study and looking at a variety of different pieces. But what's interesting about this is that with a traditional resume as constructed, what ends up happening is in that 6, maybe 10 second, is that what people typically look at are your name, who you work for, or who you worked for before if you have a professional employment history, the dates, and where you went to school. And that's your 6 to 10 seconds. And I believe it's incredibly difficult to discern a career or a job path by a few titles of roles, a couple dates, and an education. So the idea is you're creating a document that's organized and contextualized for the reader. So what we want to help you do is create a document that gets read the way you want it to be read, not the way it may typically be looked at by, let's say, traditional resume formats. The best resumes are accurate. And this is, if it is your primary or one of your primary documents to showcase your qualities and abilities, and if for opportunities, having 0 typos or mistakes with dates, places, titles, there's some flexibility and some liberty, but the idea, like, there are some rules where you don't necessarily have to write in complete sentences. There's the ability to write in fragments in cases. But generally speaking, is that great candidates have lost jobs because of inaccuracies or typos or mistakes. Alternatively, there have been documents that don't have those. It may not be as aesthetic or the person, or we will consider the opportunity because the belief is that the time and effort put into creating that document and making sure it looks. So always having people look at your document or having second opinions is a really good idea. The third thing is that they're relevant. All of you on this call today or this video today, and for those who are going to be watching this in the future, I hope, is that we'll be searching for specific roles. Targets I've mentioned, and targets are just clusters of similar jobs. But the vocabulary of those industries or the skill sets you have are incredibly or critically important. So having the understanding and oftentimes including the vocabulary of the industry or the marketplace. So if you're working in healthcare and you're interested in a marketing or sales or an operations or a clinical job, whatever those pieces are, there are terminologies, there are lengths of stay, there are DRGs, there's ICD-9s, there's tertiary care centers, et cetera, et cetera. So just being mindful of the fact it's not just putting into, if you have experience in those areas, making sure that vocabulary is consistent with what those roles are looking for. And your document should be keyword searchable. Part of when you submit an application through an applicant tracking system. And that is just the tool that organizations use to filter resumes before it gets to a person. So there are certain criteria that are being set. One of those is keyword frequency, so the number of times a word or similar word comes up. So it doesn't mean to overdo it, but just to be mindful of the fact that having vocabulary consistent with the role in and of itself is really helpful. So, and the words with more relevant keywords, which I believe is intuitive, are more likely to get found, but we're not always doing word counts or making sure, but there are tools I'll showcase at the end of this that are helpful in looking at that information in the document or quantifying pieces of it. One of the things that I believe is incredibly helpful in a modern document is to have a title at the top of the page underneath your contact details. And by title, I mean the title of the role you're applying for, not one you're currently, if you're currently in one or your current situation. It's the position description that you're looking to apply to. The condition where this might be a little different is if, for instance, there's an upcoming or going to a career fair where you may not have the specific job, but there's areas of interest. So you may be applying for a market research analyst job with a specific title. That's where I would put the market, or in this particular case, this person was looking to be a physician assistant. If you are looking for roles, you can turn market research analyst into a topic. So you could have market research or data analysis versus analyst and title. So I'm just making sure people know is that the reason why you put a title on the page is to contextualize the document. If you put a title on the page, what happens is this: somebody picked this up off a table and never seen it before, when the document could be about anything. Now it's about this topic. And this is true even if the person's expecting this document or the organization, is because when you submit a document anywhere in paper or digitally, you no longer own that document. So that may be shared with a number of people who see this. Or might wind up at somebody else's desk. What we're trying to avoid is somebody seeing a document, reading the document, drawing a conclusion, and drawing an inaccurate one. The title on a roll draws a conclusion for the reader of what they're about to read. It's just like having a cover on a book. It's versus just a blank cover where you have to go inside and have to understand what it's about. So what it does, and a lot of things that we're going to speak today are this, is that from a recruitment standpoint or a recruiter, the reason why we think about this is it makes it easier for the reader. Two things are true in recruiting or trying to hire talent. It's typically expensive and it's typically time consuming. So if there are ways to construct a document that is thoughtful, contextualized, well formatted, and relevant, it is more likely to get read. Having an initial structure up top becomes very helpful. I will say that the conversation today, we're talking about best practices and examples, but I do want to comment is that none of the information today is prescriptive or directive. You don't have to do it. But what we hope to do is in this conversation is to make sure is that not only with some of the best practices and some variance in those spaces, but also the why behind it. So understanding why these things are critical or how people are reading or looking at them. So you can take and absorb those things and create and develop your document. And the best resumes are accessible. So two things are helpful in careers. It should be easy to find you. And when we find you, it should be easy to understand why you're valuable and interesting. So you may consider uploading your resume to LinkedIn. I tend to not do that as often. The reason is if you are making changes to your LinkedIn profile, but forget to make the changes in your resume, you have two different documents showcasing similar information, but it may not be consistent or both up to date. So if you can keep up with that, I think it's reasonable to have an updated resume. But if it's not something you think you tend to focus on, the LinkedIn profile can stand on its own. You can upload your resume to Handshake so employers can view that. You can share it with recruiters and placement agencies. You can share it on large aggregating job boards like Indeed or targeted ones per industry or per sector. So just the idea is that when you're thinking about where this document can be, it can be somewhere other than your hard drive or the cloud. So, and like I said, based on your targets, it's different for everybody. But just being aware of these opportunities is helpful in document creation, but also in search for the opportunities you're looking for. So those are some key fundamentals of document creation, sort of out of the gate. What we're going to talk about now is constructing a document. So what are the building blocks of this piece? As I mentioned before, the resume is a personal marketing and branding document. So it's showcasing you, your skills, experience, and potential to an external audience, whomever that is. It is most definitely an advertisement. And I don't want that word to separate ourselves from the fact, like, it's an advertisement is showcasing something to somebody else to help them understand or learn or take an action. So this happens to be the form of, it's the way to connect with employers. So like I mentioned before, these 4 pieces. Format is like the visual appeal of this document. The content is what you did. The messaging is how you did it. And I would consider they're intertwined, but the idea is it's not just a fact book showing how you did the work and what the outcomes were. So understanding both of those pieces. So having the energy of, like, here are my accomplishments, here are the details, but also this is what was gained, or this is what was lost, or this is what was improved, and these documents are action oriented. And this is important to think about from a resume and a cover letter. And when I mean action oriented, it means your career and your education and your other experiences are not happening to you. So you are the active participant in the work that you're doing. So when we're in the documents like this, we want is to speak that way. So versus passive language where work is happening to you, or your education. It's if you engaged, developed, coded, researched, delivered, it's starting out with the fact of an action to make a connection of something that's being done for someone or something that adds value. As I mentioned earlier, there is no singular way to create a document. These 3 examples are just to showcase 3 different ways information is put on a page that all could be considered a resume. I am not in any way advocating for any of these pieces. It is just to show 3 delineated similar things to achieve similar results. So you can see, like, to how to showcase pieces. So your document is going to be based on a lot of different pieces, including the outside expectations, but also your own personal preferences. So there's no single formatting. And this is, I believe, important. And there are caveats. When I was in high school, I had a history professor where we'd have to write papers, and we'd always ask, how long should our papers be? And the instructor would always say, sufficiently long enough to cover the topic, which is infuriating, but very helpful in some ways. So the idea is, the fact is, your document is answering the question in the best way possible ideally for the audience you're trying to connect with. So what I would say is 1 page is not the benchmark for a document. I would say context and relevancy supersedes that, because it's time consuming and expensive to recruit. So if you create a document that's relevant and connected and contextualized and aesthetically pleasing if possible, and there's a flow and an understanding to this, those documents do get read. So when you're thinking about building your initial draft, whether you're a first year or you're a doctoral student or beyond, is that the initial draft of your document, at least if you are creating one from scratch or reimagining your document, is making sure all of the information that's possible gets in. And you can always take things out and you can always modify it and make it slower. But trying to make things smaller for the sake of or shorter for the sake of shortness is not as valuable as I believe we think it is. Your resumes will be or should be customized to the opportunities that you're pursuing. In the most traditional case, for applications for established roles, let's say particularly promoted online, and that could be on a company website, organization website, it could be on a job board, it could be in LinkedIn, it could be in Handshake, or any number of other places. You are trying to customize your document in response to this request for talent and experience. So typically that document is broken down oftentimes into responsibilities and qualifications. So when you're thinking about building your document, you may have maybe have all this experience, maybe a piece of experience, but you're looking to answer the questions about what they're trying to do. And particularly around responsibilities is making sure that when you're applying, how well do you fit each of those opportunities and where are the opportunities for growth and development? It's not always true, but oftentimes, and I think this case is probably true, is that when people are highlighting or bulleting responsibilities within a role, oftentimes the first, second, third, fourth, fifth ones are oftentimes the priority. It doesn't mean they're not all priorities. They typically are. So just think about the fact of what are they trying, what do they want me to do in this role, and how do I fit those pieces? And am I speaking to these things in my document, not just having a biography of your experience that they have, like I mentioned before, we don't want them to filter anything. We want this document to stand on its own and create a message and a brand for you. So having a description is helpful, incredibly helpful. And it's also helpful so I hope this is an informational conversation and showcase some information and answering questions. Strongly encourage you. The Tufts Career Center is extraordinary and one of the best jobs I've ever had. And I think most of our teammates might say the very same thing. Everyone on the team has experience outside of higher ed. So there's a lot of industry experience. And this is part of the role we have. So when you're thinking about building this, recognizing is you do not, and we encourage you not to have to do it alone. So you could always come to the Career Center or share it with an appointment and attach a resume and attach the job description. And your advisors can help you think about your document creation potentially within the context of a specific role. It doesn't even have to be the one you're currently targeting, just be an example of something you might like to do to see how something can evolve that's focused. As I mentioned before, the idea of how do you get all the stuff that we do into a one page, it can happen. And this is just a small list of a much larger list of what can go into a resume or slash CV. It could be your experience and education, but licenses and certifications, sometimes honors and awards, memberships, publications, posters, presentations, patents, if you have them, teaching and mentorship. If you are new to a certain industry or a degree program, you might not have maybe professional experience yet. We treat academic projects the same way you treat a job. If you got paid for something or not does not indicate the value and the understanding of something. So recognizing is that if you worked on something for a week or a month or a semester that had a purpose and something you created or collectively created and delivered, that's fabulous. And in a lot of ways, it makes you unique because in the professional settings, and many of you who may be currently working or have worked or going to work and school right now, is that it's important to have all of your experiences it's important to have the relevant information in that document. So if you spent 3 months on a project, you may never spend 3 months on a project ever in your career, depending on what you're doing. So the idea is you can really hone, develop, and challenge yourself and break rules and really learn something and for a lot of you in this call, a lot of roles that didn't exist 2 years ago exist now. And many of you either going to have partial skills or going to be working in those fields. Generative AI is fundamentally changing work right now, including career services to some level. So understanding that your skill set that you're developing in school may not be it's something desirable, but the industry's looking for it and wants it, but it's being taught here first. So just being aware of the fact that that what you're doing here can be very much applied to your documents. So it could, but again, research. So you can start seeing if this information starts getting relevant, the document, when tailored, can grow. So what you see in front of you now is just a few things I want to call out. This happens to be a singular page document example, but it's not to be used as the example of how one-page documents should be. It is just a visual showcase of some things I want to call attention to, so we're not just talking conceptually. So from top to bottom is one's your contact details. Well, actually, I would say this. It's even going back to framing and margin, is the font you choose. And there are definitely examples of fonts. The length and width of your margins become helpful, and like literally how you structure this piece. So recognizing the fact that design principles that exist in the creative world, and we think they're somewhere else, very much work for documents. So even things that you're looking at right now is that you have, even if it's the same font, you see different text. You see italices, you see things that are bold. You think things are all uppercase. You have some good. There's the first letters upper, or it's all uppercase, but it's lowercase. The rest of the letters after the first. What we're trying to do is you can use font and type and format to create visual cues for the reader to look at the information you want to do. That's what I sort of wanted to share. So just from an aesthetic standpoint, so it's not all one. It's not all one color. It's not all one shape. So if you can discern like differences in space and idea of what's on the page, it's easier for the brain to assimilate that information. So the brain's not absorbing what looks like pages of text. It's more than that. So with your document, top front, like for everyone, contact details, your name, you pronouns, if are you can add pronouns if you have a professional credential that you believe is relevant to a role. So if anyone has a graduate degree or a terminal degree in some area, or a certification that's resonates with the audience that you're putting in, you could put that at typically find after your names. You could have name here, comma PhD or MBA or JD, whatever that can be. But it doesn't mean you have to add it. It just means it's a possibility. People will ask, should I put my address? And I would say at this point, you almost don't need to have any identifying address information. Oftentimes, because if you're submitting for an opportunity, the expectation is that you either are there or generally there or have intention to be wherever this opportunity is. And the negotiation may be they're paying for it or not. So, but what I tend to think of is that if you are looking at different areas of the country or the world, is putting city and state, typically of the largest city close to what you're looking for. So let's just say Cambridge, Mass, or Boston, Mass, for here, just gives that piece of information. So, but it's not imperative that you add it. But what I will say is, unless explicitly requested, and sometimes this is for more CVs from the clinical and the academic world, is do not add your street address. Nobody needs to go to Google Earth and see your front door for any reason. Your phone number, I would just have 9 digits. You don't need the one. Here in for US-based companies or who have a phone number of who you're trying to connect in the US. For submission for opportunities, if you're a current student or recent alum, using your Tufts email address is perfectly fantastic. What I will say is, after you are completed your degree here, is the best practices is typically to either use a Gmail account or a customized one that's relevant to you. So the idea is this is a way to honestly to avoid ageism in documents. And again, this is we are trying to make sure that discrimination does not happen anywhere in this document. People having perceptions based on information other than the quality of the work this person's done. So the idea is if somebody sees an AOL address, they might think of my parents. If they see a Yahoo address, they might think of me. And if they might see it, but if you see a Gmail address, it's not a generationally defining piece of information. So something to keep in mind. The other thing I did not add in this particular slide is LinkedIn. If you have a LinkedIn profile, you're comfortable sharing it. Your LinkedIn profile customized to your name is ideal. If an organization reads your resume and likes it, they're going to go to your cover letter. If they like your cover letter, if that's requested, the next thing they're going to do is either Google you or go to your LinkedIn page. And then they're going to do the next thing to try to sort of complete the package of who you might be. And they'll do it in 5 minutes. This just makes it easier for the reader to do something they were already most likely going to do. So, and like I said before, the LinkedIn profile can add a lot of texture to an existing document or relevance or showcase other pieces that you may not feature in your document. I also mentioned a title, which sets the expectation for the reader. So I'm going to get into this after this slide, but I will say one thing I'm a huge advocate for is having a brief executive summary at the top of the page. An executive summary is not unlike an abstract to a paper. It's the answer to the question. So your executive summary answers the questions about why this job, why right now, and the rest of the document backs it up. And I'll go into some details around those pieces. But just for this showcase in this example, it just has a title. You can rearrange or arrange your document any way you want. What I would say is oftentimes if you're in a program, but not always, but often, education typically follows a title or an executive summary. Education is a checkbox for the reader, okay? And what I mean is that they're looking for where you went to school, where was it, when were you there, what was your degree, or degrees or concentrations, and was your GPA above a 3.5? Okay, people ask how important is the GPA. I would say you've been admitted to a school with a sterling reputation and brand equity. It doesn't mean that's everything. What I would say is the 3.5 is an incredibly arbitrary benchmark for perceived success. If you have it and feel comfortable putting on it, great. If you don't have it, leave your GPA off. And most places aren't including GPA, including some of the most prominent brands that we all aware of. So it depends on those pieces, and I don't want anyone to obsess on those aspects. If you had Latin honors, adding into it, but what we're trying to do, like you see here, is if it's checkbox, the things that I also like, if you did a thesis, a capstone, or a final project of some kind, you can name what that is and then the title of the work you've done. So this might be for undergrad or graduate or other places. It's purely marketing. Purely. It might be something you describe later in your document as research or something, but it's just to showcase the audience, if you have it and it makes sense in your situation, is you did something for a long period of time of value that may or may not have been a requirement for your degree. So, and then relevant coursework sometimes finds its place, oftentimes as undergraduates and graduates too, but as your coursework is building your skill set in addition to other things that you're doing, adding relevant coursework to showcase information can be helpful. But we're trying to keep responsibilities or work or things that you've done migrating to other areas. So if you've done leadership or community engagement and service, that's, having its own spot for that. If you have teaching and mentorship, if you have, research, if you have applied projects, if you have, et cetera, et cetera. As I mentioned earlier, what we're trying to do is have a document that gets read and does not is in is not confusing to the reader. In fact, it's organized in a way for the reader to understand the the work that's being done. So, as I mentioned, a best practice now is a document that's functional, which is sort of the what have you did, and chronological is when you did it. But what's really interesting is that organizations don't hire for time. They read dates to validate in their minds whether or not you may have been valuable somewhere for a long period of time. But if you are showcasing the value you create or the relevancy, they're going to ignore the dates for the most part. So in this particular case, is thinking about your headers. So there are four big ones. You have five. You have education, you have higher education, administrative experience, marketing experience, leadership, community engagement, and service, skills and technical competencies, and also memberships. But those headers are helpful because instead of just having professional experience or just experience, if you do it that way, if you just list experience and one or multiple pieces, what it forces the reader to do is read everything underneath, understand what each individual item means, and then how those things relate to each other. What I'm saying is that you decide how these things relate to each other, and you have unlimited license to do it. So you the same experience could be construed in different ways. You may have had multiple roles, but you may want to showcase it differently. So where you put and organize this information becomes very helpful. So this is just to demonstrate that piece. So keeping those things in mind. If you're looking for a healthcare job, you might want to put healthcare experience up front. That healthcare experience might be academic project work versus employment experience. Those things are fine because you're most likely trying to front load the document with the most relevant information. Within the individual roles, usually having where you worked, where was it, and the dates in this particular format. And the reason I like it on one line, there's plenty of room for change for different opinions or opportunities, is that it gives the highlights quickly. But one thing I do like, and it doesn't necessarily have to be underneath the title of where you worked, but I do like it incorporated into a position or a description of experience, is a one-sentence description of the organization that you work for. So in this particular example, under higher education, administration, experience, Tufts University, Tufts is a 12,000 student private non-sectarian R1 research university. That's something I pulled together between the Tufts website and Wikipedia. So the reason we like single sentence descriptions on these pieces is because it gives the job or opportunity place. So the idea is like, oh, okay, maybe they're familiar with it or maybe they're not, but now they are. And the size of the organization doesn't matter. You can work for a giant conglomerate or a two-person or one-person shop. But what this is saying is this is why I think it's helpful. Because when people are trying to look at what the role is and what the outcomes were, when they see this, they can start thinking of you in a place. And if the reader can start visualizing you working somewhere else, like in their mind, they can start picturing themselves working for you. And that's really important. Them work or you working for them. So the idea is that it makes something abstract and it makes it real fast. And then the role, oftentimes, whatever that role is, if it's graduate researcher or if it's whatever and oftentimes having the role. And I also like adding department if it's relevant it's a little bit more context of where where the work is being done in your organization. So that's helping them understand where this thing is and what it does. Then your bullets are action oriented, where it's demonstrating value and benefit creation. So usually they're quantifiable and measurable if it makes the most sense, but it doesn't mean you have to have numbers for every bullet. That's not how the world of work is. when there are opportunities to qualify or quantify that can be helpful if things are measurable. It's just understanding is that you don't want your bullets to be exclusively very brief and exclusively like just the facts, like listing roles or listing responsibilities. Is that we want to see is like what you did and why it was important. And then there's all these other I have leadership, community engagement, service. So if recognizing is that you may have you may have work study, you may have a student organization you created or are part of, is recognizing that information of how you spend. Just membership is fine. It's just how have you been intentional about your time as a person? Obviously, everyone is going to have their own ideas and expectations. The idea is to not have to memorize any of what we're sort of speaking to today. It's just taking back the fact that, oh, I can organize my document like topically, which makes it a little bit easier to navigate because there's a framework of thinking. The other thing you'll see in this is having a skills and competencies section, or skills and competencies and instrumentation. So competencies are responsibilities of the job. So there was in the first when you looked at the previous position description before we started looking at these this particular example. So I think of competencies or responsibilities for the job. I think of skills or the tools you use to accomplish the competency. So for instance, data analysis is a competency. And that's probably like we want somebody to be able to have this competency in this job. I consider Microsoft Excel or Stata or MATLAB to be the skill. And the skill is a tool you use to accomplish the competency. So in most roles, if not all, but let's close, is there will be skills that should be delineated based on what you're trying to do. So there could be engineering tools used, or it could be writing tools or assessments you be able to know. It could be information visualization and presentation. So if you know Adobe Creative Suite or Canva, or you know web development, what are those tools, et cetera, et cetera. We can help you think through those pieces because it helps people understand how you might get the work done. So takeaways is this document is something that you can skim for insights and headlines. And the idea is you can dig as deep as you'd like to get the information that you're looking for. But there's credible flexibility in structure. Again, this is not an approval or disapproval of this particular format. It's just an example of another way information has been showcased successfully. So the idea where education is simple and there's just a title without an executive summary or substructure, and a quick piece of research, but publications is the third thing. When you start looking at what am I supposed to do? And I was like, you're not. If this job requires showcasing showcasing expertise or published expertise or communicated expertise, then referring to publications is an effective way to do that. I've written a lot about these topics that are relevant to this role. So it's all the headers are different and organized, and the ability to use. So it's just one example. And another is, this is just speaking more so to the executive summary I mentioned earlier, is that if you just had education and professional diversity and inclusion experience and leadership, community engagement, volunteering, and skill, you had these individual sections, you'd still try to, what does that mean? How do these pieces go together? And well, how do I understand this if it's not a linear structure? The executive summary is designed for you to be able to control that. So having a title, I mentioned competencies, listing competencies from the position description is a very valuable way to reflect that you either know how to do or have exposure to the things that this job cares about. And then you could have bullets or a short narrative. What we don't have here is an objective. So you'll see that in some features. objective is to get a job doing. The objective of the resume is to get you a conversation interview for a position. So any information at the top of the page that is showcasing any insight is expected that it's a summary of some kind. So you don't even have to write the name summary or executive summary. It is implied that that's where this information is and why it's put in that space. So, and how information is pieced together. But you can see different structures, and there's a small box here that showcases that sometimes you describe the. So it's you could so instead of having all your bullets showcasing what the nature of the role and the outcomes, you can have 2, 3, 1, 3, 4 sentences underneath describing a job, and then having bullets that are purely outcome driven. So again, it is just to amplify the value of flexibility that you have in construing these. And the Career Center has examples of these available. So just iterating the description of these roles. And we'll make sure to make these slides available to everyone after that presentation. Briefly, I just want to showcase that there's a trend towards visual resumes, which is, I think, a good idea. I think the visualization and design of information happens all the time in advertisements. What I will say, and I think it's great ways to showcase a lot of different things. What I will say is that I think having a traditional document is a must-have. I think if you like a visual one, that's a nice to have. And the reason why I don't believe it's imperative is that visually designed documents have not been readily adopted in any way. There's in most industries. So the idea is that you don't want that 10 seconds up front. If this document is aesthetically new to a way that even if it's hyper intuitive, it still takes longer, risk the fact that somebody may pass the document just because it's not ease of use and so just keeping the consideration. And there's no standard at all. There's one certifying body that helps professional resume writers do this, but I don't think it's done particularly as well as it can be yet, and nor do I think it's for all audiences. So just to keep in mind is that a more traditional document, I think, is the primary resource used. So I know our time is collapsing. This is all it is being recorded and will be uploaded to our YouTube page. Cover letters, I'm going to go very quickly because I know that it's a lot of information, and we certainly can bring up an opportunity at another time to discuss in more detail. But pieces is that the cover letter, the resume is a historical document. The cover letter does two things. It tells the reader why this job and why right now, and it showcases why you're valuable and why you're interesting. So what should you be doing to do them? Target each one of them, customize to that opportunity. Again, the more similar the roles you're looking for, the more consistent the cover letters will be, but they are still tailored to audiences using their vocabulary or specific aspects that they're looking for. They're definitely showcasing value creation and demonstrating it. So it's showing them versus telling them a lot of times, like giving examples, and ask for help. And definitely don't reinvent the wheel. There are templates and frameworks that are available from us or elsewhere that you can use pre-existing. We have to reimagine the cover letter. And definitely don't be generic. Those will get passed by. So they're meaningful and connected, and proofread them, because just like the resume, not having the appropriate or the right detail is going to be, or having errors in that information could otherwise dismiss an incredibly well-written document that's thoughtful to the reader and valuable to the reader. So preparing for all of these things, think about them first. That's just being like, think about things and write them down. Where they go can be figured out after the fact. Keep your targeted minds looking at resumes in your peer targets. So talking to peers, or we have career guides, particularly around undergraduate community for examples of roles. Be patient. It's an iterative process, but it does not have to take a long time, particularly because you don't have to make one from scratch. And again, I always have people read their documents. And very quickly is that there are consistent pieces, for a cover letter. What I would say, one, is that your cover letter and your resume should look like they come from the same person. So they should have the same header at the top, your contact details, the same margin width and height, the same font type, not the same, the size can change. So it should look like it's coming from the same person. Then the date, the address, attention, if you know somebody. Sometimes you can have the title of the role, uh, in the top. But what I would say is, do your best to find out who is on the hiring, if you know the hiring committee or know who's hiring for this job. If you can, personalizing is fantastic. But what I would say is avoid the term to whom it may concern. Find something like dear hiring committee, dear hiring team is, or dear career services hiring team. However, if you don't know the exact person, at least personalize it a little bit. There's no singular way to write a cover letter. They come in all varieties. They're direct. They could be narrative. They could be hybrids. They could be bullets. They could be personal. There is no singular way to do it. It should be some combination of what's meaningful to these types of audiences, but also what works for you. So, but it showcases value, and there's always a call to action. Like, based on this information, I think we'll qualify for this role, and should my candidacy be desirable? I'd love to dialogue more about how I'd be helpful to your organization, and that's all paraphrased. So it's, here I am, and again, it could be mixed and matched. In this particular case, it's more bullet driven and topically driven. And this happens to be someone I'm familiar with, is that this was somebody else's framework. It's a professional resume writer's structure that was different than my thought process about what a document might be created. And I think that's true of a lot of us in career services. So you don't have to be beholden to a style. You can adapt them or think about them or change them or be open to other possibilities. And sometimes they're just personal. So in this particular case, it's somebody where their resume and experience spoke for themselves because they were criticized. So it's a clinical degree where they have to get certified, board certified to do a job. So the idea is that the expectation is that if you have to get certified by a governing body to do your job, you may not have to explain it in a cover letter because that's the nature of the role. So you can speak to other things. So again, this will be available for everyone to read, but it doesn't speak about the job. It speaks about their attitude and experience and how helpful and valuable they can be. And I mentioned before the applicant tracking systems, the technology that companies or hired job boards are using to filter candidates. There's a free or predominantly free resource called JobScan, which allows you to update a resume or a cover letter and the position description that goes with it. And it will evaluate it and score it based on a series of metrics. The score is something tend to pay much attention to. I think it's helpful as a ballpark, but the goal isn't to get to 100. I think the features within this tool are helpful, including word counts or best practices around how to develop around applicant tracking systems. So even the free version of this provides you insights about skill match and whether or not this is sort of keyword frequency, what you're doing and how it's aligned with the role. So in this case, the word mobile is being used in the resume twice as much as within the job description. It's not judging it, just saying it's sort of visually appealing. Whereas conversely, the job description is saying customer service or customer experience multiple times, and the resume doesn't say it at all. So that's why having supplemental tools and resources or having things at your disposal to make this process more effective. The Tufts career website has a lot of these templates and tools, which I think will be very valuable. For those of you who are graduate students, we don't There are examples that aren't yet published on the website, partially because of exactly this presentation today and the fact that a lot of the things that we're discussing today may be new or challenge maybe some accepted or some known norms where about how these documents should be created and we know that these are differentiating tools and then we know that they do work like how the structure of these things. So uh, there are things that the graduate career services team can absolutely provide, particularly if you schedule one-on-one appointment with myself or a member of the team. And we do have resume guides and information structures to walk through and a checklist. So we're located in Dowling Hall, the 7th floor. We are a hybrid office, so we're partially in and partially remote. So we do take virtual and in-person appointments across all backgrounds and experiences, undergrad and grad. And we are here and with hope that this insight or this introduction is a helpful resource to think about this document that's going to showcase you and that you have a partner in this process to build it, should you wish, and help customize. So in our mind is to help you become the preferred candidate for all the jobs that you seek in your career.